I was told over and over that I wasn't welcome at any family event, so when I got married, I didn't invite them. They said it so many times, it stopped stinging. "You're not welcome here, Natalie." Not this time. Family birthdays, graduations, holidays, there was always a reason. Too busy, too awkward, too me. What they didn't know was that I was taking notes. Every rejection, every cold shoulder, every moment they reminded me I didn't belong, because one day, I'd stop asking for a seat. I'd build my own table, and when I finally got married, I didn't invite a single one of them. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Seattle. And before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. My parents, Alan and Diane, believed in presentation over affection. Our house in the Ohio suburbs was their primary exhibit, a testament to their success. It was a large, colonial-style home with black shutters and a perfectly symmetrical facade. My father spent every Saturday morning tending to the lawn, ensuring each blade of grass stood at attention. My mother curated the interior like a museum curator, with pristine white furniture no one was allowed to sit on, and artfully arranged books no one was allowed to read. It was a house built for a magazine, a stage for the perfect family to perform on, and we were expected to play our parts. On the surface, we were flawless. We were the Brooks family. My dad was a respected financial advisor. My mother was on the board of 3 different local charities. My brother Ethan was the handsome athletic star of his high school, and I was the other one, the quiet, bookish daughter who filled the required slot in the family portrait. In those portraits, we were always smiling, always dressed in coordinated outfits that my mother picked out weeks in advance. That was the version of us they sold to the world. Inside, when the doors were closed and the audience was gone, the stage lights went out. The air grew thin and cold. Affection wasn't a feeling. It was a tool, used only when it served a purpose. A hug from my mother was a brief, stiff gesture, her hands patting my back as if to check for dirt before quickly pulling away. A compliment from my father was always followed by a piece of criticism, a reminder that I could be better. Their love wasn't a warm blanket. It was a checklist of expectations I could never quite fulfill. The real family dynamic operated under a set of unspoken rules, the most fundamental of which was the pedestal reserved for Ethan. He was the sun around which our family universe revolved. He was charming, popular, and looked just like our father. He could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, seemed to be born doing wrong. The favoritism wasn't a secret. It was a daily spectacle. I remember one specific Tuesday evening when I was 15. It was dinner time, which in our house was not a time for connection but for performance. My mother had cooked a pot roast, and the table was set with the good china, even though it was just the 4 of us. The conversation, as always, was a monologue delivered by my father and Ethan. They talked about Ethan's upcoming football game, my dad's golf handicap, a new client he had landed. My mother would interject with praise for them both. "Oh, Alan, that's wonderful!" Or, "Ethan, your coach must be so impressed." I sat there, cutting my roast into tiny, precise pieces, listening to the conversation flow around me like a river around a stone. I had gotten a test back in my AP history class that day. I'd scored a 98, the highest grade in the class. I was proud of it. I had studied for weeks. I waited for a pause, a small opening to share my news. Finally, my father took a sip of water, and I saw my chance. "I got my history test back today," I said, my voice feeling unnaturally loud in the room. My father glanced at me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes for the interruption. "And I got a 98, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother said, not looking up from her plate. My father just grunted and turned back to Ethan. "So, about that new defensive play you were telling me about," and that was it. My achievement was dismissed in less than 5 seconds. A few minutes later, Ethan mentioned he had finally cleaned out the garage. My parents lit up. "Oh, Ethan, thank you. That's such a huge help," my father boomed. "We're so proud of the responsible young man you're becoming," my mother added, beaming at him. Cleaning the garage was worthy of a hero's praise. My academic success was a footnote. I felt a familiar hot sting behind my eyes, but I pushed it down. Crying would only make it worse. This dynamic bled into every aspect of our lives. When Ethan was 16, he took Dad's new sedan for a joyride and wrapped it around a neighbor's mailbox. The punishment was non-existent. The next day, Dad was showing him car brochures. When I was 16 and got my first and only detention for being late to class because my locker was jammed, my parents grounded me for 2 weeks and gave me a lecture on responsibility. "We have a reputation in this town, Natalie," my father had said, his voice laced with disappointment. Your actions reflect on us. My mother's favorite weapon was a simple phrase, "You always make things harder than they have to be." She used it to dismantle any feeling I tried to express. If I was sad, I was being dramatic. If I was angry, I was being difficult. If I was hurt, I was playing the victim. She once found my diary when I was 14 and read it. In it, I had written about how lonely I felt, how I wished they would notice me. She didn't apologize for invading my privacy. She sat me down and told me I needed to work on my attitude. "This kind of negativity isn't healthy, Natalie," she'd said, holding my diary. "You just make things so much harder on yourself with this constant melodrama." I learned that my feelings were an inconvenience, so I learned to have fewer of them. Or at least I learned to hide them. Silence became my refuge. I retreated into books and schoolwork. I made myself smaller, quieter, less present. I became a ghost in my own home, gliding through hallways, leaving no trace. By 17, I wasn't just invisible. I was an expert at disappearing. I had mastered the art of being in a room without being seen. I ate my meals quickly and silently. I did my homework, I did my chores, and I stayed out of the way. I was biding my time, counting the days until I could walk out the front door and never look back. My childhood wasn't a time of joy or growth. It was a long, quiet lesson in how to survive being unloved. The day I left for college felt like the first day of my real life. The drive to the airport was silent. My father tapped the steering wheel. My mother stared out the window, and Ethan had his headphones on. There were no tearful goodbyes, no last-minute words of wisdom. At the security gate, my father gave me a stiff pat on the shoulder. "Don't get into any trouble," he said, his standard farewell. My mother gave me one of her mannequin hugs. "Call us when you land," she instructed, her tone the same as if she were telling me to pick up milk. Then they turned and walked away without looking back. I stood there, watching them go, and felt a profound sense of relief. I was free. Seattle was everything Ohio wasn't. It was gray and moody and unapologetically itself. The constant misty rain felt like it was washing away years of forced sunshine. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. My dorm room was tiny and smelled like old carpet, but it was a sanctuary. It was the first space that was truly mine. I could be messy. I could be quiet. I could exist without being judged. I made friends, tentative at first, then with a growing confidence. They were drawn to my quiet nature, seeing it not as a flaw, but as a sign of being a good listener. They'd tell me about their families, their chaotic, loving, complicated homes, and I would listen, fascinated. When they asked about mine, I'd give vague, polished answers. "They're great. Very traditional. We're not a very emotional family." It was easier than explaining the truth. After I graduated with a degree in communications, there was never any question of moving back home. I got a marketing job at a tech startup and rented a tiny apartment in Capitol Hill. It was on the top floor of a creaky old building, and the heating was unreliable, but it was my kingdom. I filled it with secondhand furniture, leafy plants, and stacks of books. I built a life from scratch. I found a found family in my friends. We'd host potlucks for Thanksgiving, celebrate birthdays with cheap cake and too much wine, and support each other through breakups and job losses. It was in these simple, genuine moments that I learned what connection was supposed to feel like. Despite the new life I was building, a stubborn sense of duty kept me trying to connect with my family. For years, I was the only one who made an effort. I sent thoughtful, expensive Christmas presents and birthday gifts. I'd spend hours choosing a beautiful scarf for my mother or a first edition book for my father. My efforts were met with silence. I wouldn't get a thank you call or text. The only way I'd know they received the gifts was by seeing my mother wearing the scarf in a photo Ethan posted on Facebook, with no mention of where it came from. I would call on holidays. I remember one Christmas morning, sitting in my quiet apartment, looking at the tiny tree my friends and I had decorated. I felt a pang of loneliness and called home. Ethan answered, his voice loud and boisterous. I could hear the sounds of a happy family in the background. Laughter, music, the crackling of a fire. "Oh, hey, Nat," he said, distracted. "Hold on." I was put on hold for 5 full minutes. I could still hear everything happening, a phantom at their feast. Finally, my mother came on the line. "Natalie, honey, we're right in the middle of opening presents. Is everything okay?" Her voice was laced with impatience, as if my call was a crisis. "I just wanted to say Merry Christmas," I said, my voice small. "Oh, Merry Christmas. We'll call you back later," she chirped, and then the line went dead. They never called back. The final definitive act of my exile happened a few years later. Through a cousin's social media, I saw that my family was throwing a huge party for my father's 60th birthday. It was an elaborate affair at a country club. The photos showed everyone, all my aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant relatives I barely knew. Ethan was there with his fiancée giving a toast. My parents were at the center of it all, beaming. I scanned photo after photo, looking at the smiling faces, the elegant decorations, the towering cake, and the only thing I could feel was a cold, hollowing emptiness. They hadn't just forgotten to invite me, they had deliberately chosen not to. I was not part of their family, and this was their way of making it official. The pain was so sharp that I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out in vulnerability. I texted my mother. I didn't want to start a fight. I just wanted some kind of acknowledgement. Saw the photos from Dad's party, I wrote. It looked like a wonderful celebration. I'm sad I missed it. I wish I could have been there. I spent the next few hours in a state of high anxiety, checking my phone every few minutes. A part of me hoped this would be the moment of breakthrough. Maybe she would see my pain and offer an apology, an explanation, anything. The response came late that night. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and my heart leaped into my throat. I opened the message. Her words were colder and crueler than silence ever could have been. You've always chosen distance. You moved halfway across the country. Don't play the victim now. I read the text again and again, the words blurring through my tears. It was the most profound form of gaslighting I had ever experienced. They had spent 2 decades pushing me out, making me feel unwelcome, ignoring my existence. And now, they had successfully rewritten history to make my exclusion my own choice. I was the one who had abandoned them. I was the one playing the victim. In their narrative, they were the ones who were hurt. That text was not just a message, it was a verdict. I had been tried and found guilty of a crime I didn't commit. And with that, the door to my childhood home, which had been closing on me for years, was finally slammed shut and locked for good. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it, for the first time, I felt the faintest spark of peace. The fight was over. I had lost, but I was finally free. Life after that final text was a strange, quiet landscape. The grief was real, but it was also liberating. I stopped trying. I stopped sending cards. I stopped making calls. I stopped hoping. I poured all my energy into the life I had built in Seattle, into my friendships, my career, and myself. It was a few months into this new, silent chapter that I met Eric. Our meeting was unremarkable, which in retrospect feels perfect. There was no lightning bolt, no dramatic movie moment. We worked in the same office building. His graphic design firm was 2 floors above my marketing agency. We'd see each other in the elevator exchanging polite, shy smiles. One rainy Tuesday morning, the city drenched in its signature downpour, we both made a dash for the building's entrance at the same time and ended up huddled under the small, inadequate awning. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that cut through the gray morning. I think we need a better strategy, he said, then offered to share his huge, golf-sized umbrella for the short walk to the coffee shop next door. That was it. A small, simple act of kindness from a stranger. Our first date was for coffee. I was nervous, my hands wrapped tightly around my mug for warmth. I was used to conversations being a minefield, a place where I had to constantly monitor my words to avoid being seen as difficult or dramatic. With Eric, it was different. He asked questions, real questions. Not just what do you do, but why do you like it? Not just where are you from, but what was it like growing up there? He listened with a focused intensity that I found both unnerving and deeply comforting. He wasn't waiting for his turn to talk. He was genuinely trying to understand who I was. As we started dating more seriously, the topic of family became an unavoidable hurdle. I was terrified of telling him my story. I thought it would scare him away, that he would see me as damaged goods. The first time he was supposed to meet my found family of friends, I almost canceled. I was convinced my friends would accidentally say something, that my carefully constructed facade would crumble. But the most terrifying and ultimately healing experience was meeting his family. He invited me to his parents' house for a Sunday dinner. I spent the entire day in a state of near panic. I imagined a grilling, a formal inspection, a house as cold and pristine as my own. Instead, when I walked in, I was greeted by the smell of roasting chicken and the sound of laughter. His mother, a woman with a warm, crinkly smile, pulled me into a hug that felt real. His father shook my hand and immediately started telling me a terrible dad joke. The entire evening was a revelation. They talked over each other. They argued about politics. They laughed until they cried. They were messy and loud and chaotic and so full of love it was palpable. They asked me questions about my life, my job, my hobbies, and they listened to my answers. At one point, Eric's mom asked about my family. Do they live in Ohio too, dear? I froze, the familiar lump forming in my throat. Eric, sensing my panic, gently squeezed my hand under the table. Natalie's family is pretty private, he said smoothly, changing the subject. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just protected me. Later that night, as we drove home, I burst into tears. He pulled the car over, utterly bewildered. Through my sobs, I tried to explain. Your family, they're so nice, I managed to say. It sounded so inadequate. What I meant was, I never knew families could be like that. I never knew that kind of warmth was real. He didn't say anything. He just held me until I stopped crying. That night was a turning point. I felt safe enough to tell him everything. We were in his apartment, curled up on the couch. I told him about the favoritism, the silence, the dismissals. I told him about the birthday parties I wasn't invited to, the achievements that went unacknowledged. Finally, I told him about my dad's 60th birthday party and the cruel gaslighting text from my mother. I laid out all the ugly, broken pieces of my childhood, fully expecting him to recoil. When I was finished, the room was quiet. He didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He didn't tell me I should forgive them or that they probably didn't mean it. He just looked at me, his expression full of a deep, aching empathy. He reached out, gently tucking a piece of hair behind my ear. You deserved better than that, he said, his voice soft but firm. That simple sentence was the key that unlocked decades of pain. It was the validation I had spent my entire life searching for. He wasn't pitying me. He was affirming my reality. He was telling me that the hurt I felt was legitimate. He saw the wound, and instead of telling me it wasn't that bad, he acknowledged the scar. A year later, he proposed. It was a Wednesday night in our kitchen. I'd had a terrible day at work. A big campaign I was leading had hit a major snag, and I was trying to de-stress by cooking an overly complicated pasta dish. I got distracted, the sauce burned to the bottom of the pan, and the smoke alarm started shrieking. I was frantically waving a dish towel at it, on the verge of tears, feeling like a complete failure in every aspect of my life. Eric walked in, took one look at the smoky kitchen and my panicked face, and started to laugh. He calmly took the towel, turned off the stove, and fanned the smoke alarm until it went silent. Then, in the middle of our hazy, messy kitchen, he got down on one knee. He pulled out a small velvet box. I don't care if we eat burnt pasta for the rest of our lives, he said, his eyes shining, as long as I get to eat it with you. Will you marry me? I stared at him, kneeling on our cheap linoleum floor amidst the smell of burnt tomatoes, and I started laughing through my tears. It was the most ridiculous, imperfect, and absolutely perfect moment of my life, and for the first time I said yes to something big, something life-changing with a heart that was completely, utterly free of fear. After the initial joy of our engagement settled, a familiar, cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I had to tell my family. Eric and I spent a whole evening talking about it. He sat across from me at our small kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea, his expression patient. You don't have to, you know, he said gently. We don't need their permission or their approval. We can just get married. I appreciated his instinct to protect me, but it felt more complicated than that. I know, I said, tracing the rim of my own mug. It's not about approval. I think it's about closing the door properly. If I don't tell them, it feels like I'm hiding. It feels like I'm still scared of them. I don't want to be scared anymore. It was, I realized, one final test. Not for them, but for me. I wanted to do the normal thing, to announce my engagement, and to face their inevitable reaction with the strength I now had with Eric by my side. So I chose not to call. A phone call felt too intimate, too vulnerable. It would give my mother an opening to use her tone of voice as a weapon. Instead, I opened the family group chat, a digital ghost town on my phone that I hadn't muted out of some strange sense of morbid curiosity. I typed a simple, factual message. No emotion, no frills. Hi everyone. Just wanted to let you know that Eric and I are engaged. We're getting married this summer. I hovered my thumb over the send button for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. Eric reached across the table and covered my hand with his. I took a deep breath and pressed send. The message appeared in the chat with a quiet whoosh. I immediately put my phone face down on the table. The next 48 hours were a unique form of torture. I was hyper-aware of my phone at all times. Every buzz or notification sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I was distracted at work, sitting in meetings and replaying different potential responses in my head. A small, stupidly optimistic part of me imagined a simple congratulations. A bigger, more realistic part braced for criticism or, more likely, complete silence. A distant aunt I saw once a decade replied with a string of celebratory emojis. Ethan's fiancé gave the message a thumbs-up reaction. From my parents and my brother, there was nothing. The silence was deafening. It was a deliberate, calculated choice to ignore the biggest news of my life. On the evening of the second day, my phone lit up with a private message. It was from my mother. My blood ran cold. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking slightly. Eric saw my expression and came over to stand behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders. I opened the message. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a question about my happiness. It was a cold, transactional inquiry. 5 words that perfectly summarized our entire relationship. Who's paying for it? I felt the air leave my lungs. It was so perfectly her. To take a moment of joy and reduce it to a financial calculation. To see my marriage not as a union of love, but as a potential expense, a burden. She wasn't asking because she wanted to help. She was asking to gauge how much of an inconvenience this would be for her. Eric read the message over my shoulder and let out a quiet, angry breath. I felt his hands tighten on my shoulders, a protective gesture. I took a moment, then typed a calm, simple reply. Eric and I are covering it ourselves. This felt important. It was a line in the sand. We are adults. We are independent. We need nothing from you. The reply came back in seconds, as if she had been waiting with her response loaded and ready to fire. It was the final, fatal blow to a relationship that had been dying for years. Then don't expect us to show up to watch you embarrass yourself. I stared at the words. But the expected crushing pain didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, hollow calm. It was the numbness that comes when a wound has been prodded so many times the nerves simply die. She had said variations of this to me my whole life, that my choices were wrong, that my feelings were an embarrassment. This was just the final, most explicit version. She wasn't just declining an invitation I hadn't even sent. She was passing a final judgment on my life, on the man I loved, on my capacity for happiness. I showed the phone to Eric. He read it, and a muscle in his jaw clenched. He took the phone from my hands, set it on the counter, and wrapped his arms around me. I'm so sorry, Nat, he whispered into my hair. I'm so sorry they're like this. In the past, I would have dissolved into tears. I would have drafted a dozen angry, pleading replies, trying to defend myself, to make her see how cruel she was being. But this time was different. I just stood there, wrapped in Eric's arms, and felt nothing. The fight had gone out of me. There was no one left to fight with. You can't reason with a brick wall. I never replied to her message. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an argument. I didn't give her any more of my energy, my anger, or my pain. I just let her cruel words hang there in the digital space, a final, ugly monument to a relationship that never was. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the first truly powerful decision I had ever made in my relationship with them. I was letting them have the last word, and in doing so, I was finally setting myself free. The week before the wedding was a whirlwind of joyful chaos. Our small Seattle apartment was command central, overflowing with seating charts, flower arrangements, and half-finished DIY projects. Eric, bless his heart, proved to be a master at tying tiny ribbons onto wedding favors, his large, capable hands surprisingly nimble. We were a team, navigating the final stretch with a mixture of excitement and happy exhaustion. At night, we'd collapse onto the couch, surrounded by tulle and lists, and just laugh. This was ours. We were building this day, this life, together. Throughout the preparations, the silence from my family was a constant, low hum in the background. It was no longer a source of pain, but a simple fact. Like the gray Seattle sky. They weren't coming. I had accepted it. I had mourned it. And I had moved on. The space they would have occupied at the wedding was now filled with friends who had become my family, and with Eric's parents, who had embraced me with a warmth I was still getting used to. I felt protected. I felt loved. For the first time, the drama of my family felt distant, like a story that had happened to someone else. It was on a Tuesday night, just 5 days before the wedding, that the final dismissal came. It wasn't a text or a phone call. It was far more public and far crueler. Eric was on the phone with the caterer, confirming the final head count. I was taking a rare moment of peace, scrolling aimlessly through Facebook on my laptop. It was the usual feed of baby pictures and political rants. And then I saw it. It was a photo posted by my brother, Ethan. The picture was taken in the formal dining room of my parents' house, a room reserved for holidays and important guests. The table was set with the best china and gleaming silverware. My parents were at either end of the table, my father raising a glass of champagne and a toast, a broad, proud smile on his face. My mother was seated next to him, looking radiant and elegant, smiling at Ethan, who was taking the photo. His fiancé was there, along with a few of my parents' closest friends, people I had known my whole life as aunts and uncles. They were all dressed up, their faces glowing with happiness. It was the caption. However, that made the air freeze in my lungs. Ethan had written, "A wonderful family dinner to celebrate Mom and Dad's anniversary and send them off on their big trip to Maui. So well deserved." I stared at the screen, my mind working slowly to connect the dots. Their anniversary wasn't for another 3 months. And Maui? They had never mentioned a trip to Maui. I quickly clicked on my mother's profile. Her most recent post was from an hour ago. It was a picture of 2 airline tickets resting on a table next to 2 passports. The departure date was clearly visible. Saturday, October 15th, my wedding day. A wave of something cold and sharp washed over me. This was a new level of cruelty. They weren't just skipping my wedding. They weren't just ignoring it. They had planned a luxurious celebratory vacation to deliberately overlap with it. They had orchestrated a happy family event, a send-off party, and broadcast it for the world to see. It was a public and definitive statement. Your most important day is of no importance to us. In fact, it's an occasion for us to celebrate our own happiness, as far away from you as possible. The photo was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It created a bulletproof alibi. Anyone who asked why they weren't at my wedding would be told about this long-planned, non-refundable anniversary trip. They weren't the villains who callously skipped their only daughter's wedding. They were the poor, unfortunate parents whose special trip just happened to conflict. It was a perfectly crafted move in my mother's lifelong campaign of narrative control. I looked at their smiling faces, at the clinking champagne glasses, at the performance of a happy, loving family. And the strangest thing happened. The initial shock didn't curdle into the familiar pain or anger I expected. The numbness that had settled in after my mother's last text message began to solidify into something else entirely. It was a feeling of profound, crystal-clear clarity. This act was so outrageous, so cartoonishly villainous, that it was almost liberating. There was no longer any room for doubt, no space for me to wonder if I had done something wrong, if I could have tried harder. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, calculated act of erasure. Eric got off the phone, a triumphant look on his face. "Caterer is all set," he said, then he saw my expression. "Nat, what's wrong?" I didn't say anything. I just turned the laptop toward him. He leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. I watched his face change. His cheerful smile evaporated, replaced by a look of disbelief, which then hardened into a quiet, simmering rage. He read the caption, looked at the date on the airline tickets, and then looked back at the smiling faces in the photo. "Are you kidding me?" he whispered, his voice tight. They planned a vacation? On our wedding day?" I nodded, a strange, small smile touching my lips. "It's their anniversary trip," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Their anniversary is in January." Eric straightened up, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'll call them," he said, his protective instincts kicking into overdrive. "I'll give them a piece of my mind. This is unbelievably cruel." "No," I said, closing the laptop. The sound of it clicking shut felt final, definitive. Don't say a word. It's what they want. They want a reaction. They want drama. They want to be able to tell everyone how their hysterical daughter and her awful fiancé ruined their vacation. He stared at me, his anger warring with confusion. "So we just let them get away with this?" I stood up and walked over to him, placing my hands on his chest. "There's nothing to get away with, Eric. This isn't a fight. It's a statement. They've made their position clear. They are not my family. And you know what? It's a relief." And as I said the words, I realized they were true. It was a relief. The last stubborn thread of obligation had just been severed. I owed them nothing. Not my anger, not my sadness, and certainly not a single thought on my wedding day. I looked up at him, my smile widening. It's perfect, really. They took the decision out of my hands. I never have to feel guilty about them again. They've given me the greatest wedding gift imaginable, their permanent absence. I leaned in and whispered, my voice full of a calm I hadn't felt in years. "Perfect. Stay gone." The morning of my wedding, I woke up to the soft, gentle drumming of rain against the window pane. In Seattle, this was a sign of good luck, a promise of a clean, fresh start. A soft, misty light filtered through the clouds, bathing everything in a gentle, ethereal glow. It was a perfect Seattle day. Our ceremony was set to take place at the Volunteer Park Conservatory, a beautiful Victorian glasshouse filled with towering palms and exotic flowers. It was our own private, lush oasis in the middle of the city. As I got ready in a small suite nearby with my 2 best friends, Sarah and Chloe, a sense of profound peace settled over me. There were no frantic phone calls from a demanding mother, no passive-aggressive comments about my choice of dress or hairstyle. There was just the easy laughter of my friends, the scent of hairspray and gardenias, and the quiet joy of the day ahead. I had designed my wedding dress myself, a simple, elegant column of ivory lace with long sleeves and a low back. The process of creating it had been an act of reclamation. Every decision, from the choice of fabric to the placement of each pearl button, was mine alone. My mother had always used clothes as a tool of control, dressing me in stiff, uncomfortable outfits that reflected her taste, not mine. This dress was the opposite of that. It was comfortable. It felt like me. Wearing it, I felt powerful. When it was time to leave for the conservatory, the rain had softened to a fine mist. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming flowers. As we walked in, the warmth and humidity of the glass house enveloped us. It was breathtaking. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, illuminating the thousands of shades of green. Our guests, a small collection of about 50 people, were already seated. As I looked out at them, my heart swelled. Every single person there was someone who had actively chosen to be a part of my life. There were my friends from college, who had been my surrogate family for over a decade. There were my colleagues from work, who had cheered my successes and supported me through challenges. And there was Eric's family, his parents, his sister, his grandparents, who had welcomed me with open arms and treated me like a daughter from day one. There were no blood relatives of mine in attendance. There were no resentful obligatory guests. Every seat was filled with genuine love and support. This was it. This was the table I had built for myself. My friend Sarah walked down the aisle first, then Chloe, then it was my turn. The music started, a simple acoustic guitar melody. The doors opened and I saw him. Eric was standing at the end of the aisle, underneath a massive fern, looking impossibly handsome in his dark gray suit. His eyes met mine, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. As I walked toward him, I felt no ache for the people who were missing. I didn't glance at the front row, picturing the empty spaces where my parents and brother should have been. My past was not a ghost at my wedding. It was simply not there. My focus was entirely on the man waiting for me, on the future we were about to begin. The feeling that washed over me was not loss or sadness or even anger. It was an overwhelming sense of relief. Relief that I didn't have to perform. Relief that I wouldn't have to endure my mother's critical gaze or my father's dismissive silence. Relief that this beautiful, perfect day would not be tarnished by their presence. When I reached Eric, he took my hand. His was warm and steady. We turned to face the officiant, a close friend of ours, and the ceremony began. Our vows were the heart of it all. We had written them ourselves. Eric went first. He looked directly at me, his eyes shining with emotion. "Natalie," he began, his voice thick with feeling. "From the first day I met you, I knew you were someone special. But it wasn't until I really got to know you that I understood the depth of your strength and the beauty of your heart. You've taught me what it means to be resilient, to be kind in the face of unkindness, and to build your own happiness." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I know that for a lot of your life, you were made to feel like you were in the background, like your voice didn't matter." He squeezed my hand. "So I want to make this vow to you, in front of everyone we love. You will never be in the background with me. You are the main event. You are the most important person in the room. You are not invisible to me." When he said that, a single tear escaped and slid down my cheek. The sob that caught in my throat wasn't from sadness. It was from recognition. It was the feeling of being seen, truly and completely, for the first time in my life. When it was my turn, I looked at this wonderful man who had shown me what love was supposed to feel like. "Eric," I said, my voice trembling but clear, "I used to think that a home was a building with 4 walls and a roof. You taught me that a home is a person. A home is a feeling of safety, of acceptance, of being loved not in spite of who you are, but because of it. You are my home." We exchanged rings. We were pronounced husband and wife, and we shared a kiss that was full of all the promise of the life we were starting. As we walked back down the aisle hand in hand, our friends and family cheering and blowing bubbles, I felt a joy so pure and uncomplicated it was breathtaking. The reception was in a small, historic hall nearby. We ate amazing food, we drank champagne, and we danced for hours. The toasts were heartfelt and funny. My friend Sarah told an embarrassing story from our college dorms. Eric's father welcomed me to the family and told me he couldn't have wished for a better partner for his son. There was no pretense, no formality. It was just a room full of love. Later that evening, Eric and I slipped outside for a moment alone. The rain had stopped and the air was cool and crisp. We stood on the quiet street, the sound of our party drifting out from the open doors. "Happy?" he asked, pulling me close. I leaned my head against his chest and looked up at the misty sky. "More than I ever thought was possible," I said. And in that moment, I knew I had everything I would ever need. The 3 days after our wedding were a blissful, quiet bubble. We didn't go on a big honeymoon right away. Instead, we took a mini-moon in our own city, staying in a beautiful hotel downtown. We slept in late, ordered room service, and explored Seattle like tourists. Our apartment was filled with wedding gifts and drying bouquets, and our hearts were full. We were blissfully disconnected from the outside world, living in a perfect little world of our own making. I didn't check social media once. I had no desire to. For the first time, my own life was more interesting than anyone else's. On the third day, a Tuesday, we returned to our apartment. As we were unpacking our bags and sorting through a mountain of gifts, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my cousin Megan. She was one of the few relatives on my father's side who had always been kind to me, though we weren't close. The text was short and ominous. "Hey Nat, congrats again on the wedding." The pictures looked beautiful. "You might want to check Facebook though. Your mom is, well, just check it." A cold dread immediately extinguished the warm, happy glow I'd been living in. I knew with a sinking certainty that my mother had made her next move. The piece had been too good to be true. Eric saw my expression change and came over, putting a hand on my shoulder. "What is it?" "It's my mom," I said, my voice flat. "She's done something." With trembling hands, I opened the Facebook app. I didn't have to search for it. Her post was at the top of my feed, pushed there by a flurry of comments and reactions. The photo was stunning, professionally so. It showed my mother, Diane, standing on a black sand beach in Maui. She was wearing a flowing white linen dress. Her hair was blowing gently in the breeze, and she had a serene, slightly melancholic expression on her face as she gazed out at the turquoise ocean. She looked like the star of a sad romantic movie. The photo was designed to evoke sympathy, but it was the caption that was the true work of art, a masterclass in manipulation. It read, "It is with a heavy heart that we couldn't attend our daughter Natalie's wedding this weekend. Her choices have made it impossible for us to be there in the way we would have wanted. We are praying for her happiness from afar and hope that one day our family can be whole again. For now, we are grateful for this time to heal in this beautiful place." I read it once, then twice, dissecting the calculated cruelty of every word. She had framed herself as the heartbroken victim. She used vague but damaging language like "her choices," allowing people to fill in the blanks with their own worst assumptions. She painted herself as the pious, forgiving mother, praying for her happiness, while simultaneously telling the world that I was the one who had broken the family. She had even managed to frame their luxury vacation as a necessary retreat, for them to heal from the pain I had supposedly caused them. It was brilliant, it was diabolical, and it was working. Underneath the post, there were dozens of comments from family friends, distant relatives, and members of her various charity boards. "Diane, you are the strongest woman I know. Thinking of you and Alan. Such a shame when children forget who raised them. Your grace is an inspiration. We are so sorry you had to go through this. Enjoy your time to heal. It's her loss. Sending love and prayers." My entire life, my story, had been hijacked and rewritten in a single post. I was no longer a woman who had just gotten married. I was a cruel, ungrateful daughter who had broken her poor mother's heart. The anger I had expected to feel wasn't there. The pain was absent. As I stared at the screen, at the carefully constructed lies and the outpouring of misguided sympathy, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. This was no longer an emotional issue. This was a strategic one. My mother had just launched a public relations attack, and I, a marketing professional, suddenly saw the situation with startling clarity. I was no longer the hurt child. I was a brand manager whose brand was under assault. "Let me see that," Eric said, his voice seething. He took the phone from my hand. I watched as he read the post and the comments, a dark red flush creeping up his neck. "That's it," he snarled. "I'm commenting. I'm going to tell every single one of these people the truth. I'll post the text message she sent you. I'll tell them about the Maui trip. I will not let her do this to you." He was already reaching for his own phone when I put my hand on his arm. "No," I said, my voice firm and even. He looked at me, his eyes blazing with protective fury. "Natalie, we can't let her get away with this. She's slandering you." "I know," I said calmly, "and responding with anger is exactly what she wants. She wants a fight. She wants me to look hysterical and unhinged so she can say, 'See? Look how difficult she is.' And if we get into a mudslinging match we've already lost, we'll just look bitter and angry. She'll look graceful and sad. She'll win. Eric paused, his frustration clear. So what do we do? Just let her lie? I looked back at my mother's perfectly staged photo, the beautiful beach, the serene expression. It was all a performance. And I knew with absolute certainty how to beat a performance. You don't fight a lie with anger, I said, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. You fight it with a better truth. That night, after Eric's anger had subsided into a quiet, simmering protectiveness, we sat on the couch together. He wanted to wage war. I wanted to execute a strategy. For years, I had reacted to my mother's provocations with emotion, with tears, with pleading, with frustrated anger. Each time, I had lost. She was a master at manipulating emotion, at twisting my genuine hurt into perceived hysteria. This time, I refused to play her game. This time, I would play mine. What are you thinking? Eric asked, watching me as I scrolled thoughtfully through our wedding photos on my laptop. I'm thinking about marketing, I said. My mother has created a narrative. She is the graceful, heartbroken matriarch. I am the difficult, ungrateful daughter. Her brand is pious victim. It's a strong brand, but it has a weakness. Which is? It's not authentic, I said, stopping on a photo. It's a performance. And the best way to beat a performance is with raw, undeniable truth. I knew I couldn't engage directly. Posting an angry rebuttal or revealing her cruel text messages would be seen as petty and vindictive. It would only validate her narrative that I was difficult. I needed to counter her story without ever acknowledging it. I needed to shift the conversation by presenting a more compelling, more authentic alternative. The photographers had sent us a preview gallery of hundreds of pictures. I scrolled past the perfect posed shots, the ones of us smiling formally at the camera. They were beautiful, but they weren't the truth I was looking for. I was looking for a moment, and then I found it. The photo wasn't technically perfect. It was taken during the reception, after the formal photos were done. We had slipped outside onto a small patch of grass, still damp from the earlier rain. I had taken off my heels, and Eric had loosened his tie. Someone must have said something. Funny because in the picture, we were both thrown back in uncontrollable laughter. My head was tilted back, my mouth wide open in a silent, joyful roar. His arm was around my waist, and he was looking at me, his own face creased with a deep, loving laugh. My mascara was a little smudged, his hair was a mess, and the moment was utterly, breathtakingly real. It was a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. It was everything my mother's sad, serene beach photo was not. Her photo was posed. Ours was candid. Her photo was about solitude and healing. Ours was about connection and celebration. Her photo was a lie. Ours was the truth. That one, I said, pointing to the screen. That's the one. Next, I needed the right words. I couldn't be aggressive. I couldn't be accusatory. I had to rise above. I opened a new document and began to type. I wrote and deleted a dozen captions. Finally, I landed on something simple, something that was both personal and universal. It didn't attack my mother, but it completely dismantled her premise. I logged into my own Facebook profile, my hands steady. I uploaded the laughing photo, and in the caption box, I wrote the words I had so carefully chosen. The last few days have been the happiest of my life. To be surrounded by people who show up, not for appearances, but out of genuine love, is the greatest gift. It taught me that family isn't about obligation or who you're related to by blood. Family is who shows up for you. To all our friends and family who came and celebrated with us, thank you for showing up. You are our home. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't mention Maui or choices or prayer. I simply presented my truth. I hit post and closed the laptop. For the first few hours, the response was quiet. A few likes from my close friends. A love reaction from Eric's mom. But then, something started to shift. A colleague from work commented, "This picture is pure joy. Congratulations, Natalie." An old college friend wrote, "This is what happiness looks like. So happy for you both." Then, the private messages began to trickle in. They came from people I hadn't expected. A former classmate wrote, "I saw your mom's post and something didn't feel right. Then I saw yours. You did the right thing. Your wedding looked like it was full of real love." An estranged cousin, on my father's side, sent a message. "I've been watching your mom pull these stunts for years. Good for you for not taking the bait. I see you." Each message was a small beacon of validation. People were seeing through the performance. My quiet, authentic post was resonating in a way my mother's dramatic one had not. People are drawn to truth. By the next morning, my post had been shared by a few of my friends. The tone of the public conversation had completely changed. No one was talking about my mother's heavy heart anymore. They were talking about my beautiful wedding, about the obvious love between me and Eric. My mother's post, once flooded with sympathy, now sat there looking lonely and melodramatic. The comments had stopped. Her performance had been upstaged. I had won, and I had done it without stooping to her level. I hadn't slung mud or aired dirty laundry. I had simply stood in my own truth and let it speak for itself. It was a quiet victory, but it was the most profound victory of my life. I hadn't just won an argument on social media. I had taken back control of my own story. Months melted into a year. Married life was a quiet, comfortable joy I had never known. Eric and I built a home together, not just in our apartment, but in the routines and rituals of our shared life, in the way he always made me coffee in the morning, the way I always saved him the last bite of dessert, the way we could sit in comfortable silence for hours. About a year after the wedding, I had to fly to Ohio for a work conference. The thought of being back in the same state as my parents sent a small, anxious flutter through my chest, but it was fainter than it used to be. It was a distant echo, not a roar. On my last day there, I had a few hours to spare before my flight home. On an impulse I still don't fully understand, I rented a car and drove to my old neighborhood. The house looked exactly the same, but smaller, somehow less intimidating. The lawn was perfect. The shutters were still a glossy black. It looked like a dollhouse, a perfect replica of a home that was never really a home at all. I parked across the street just watching it for a long time. There was no anger, no sadness, just a quiet sense of detachment. I had no desire to see them, no need for a final dramatic confrontation, but I did feel the need to close the chapter, for myself. I had written a short note on a piece of hotel stationery. I got out of the car, walked up the familiar stone path, and slipped the note under the front door. It said, "You taught me for 30 years that I wasn't welcome." I finally listened. "So I stopped waiting for an invitation to your table and built my own home. I wish you peace." I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I just walked back to my car and drove away, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. Back in Seattle, back in the warmth of my real home, I unpacked a box of things from the wedding that we'd never gotten around to sorting. Inside was the framed photo of my parents that had been part of a small display of family pictures, an olive branch from a time when I still hoped. I took their picture out of the frame. I didn't rip it up. I just put it away in a box in the back of the closet. Then, Eric and I took down the polished professional wedding photo that hung in our living room, the one where we were smiling perfectly at the camera. We replaced it with the other one, the real one, the one where we were caught in a moment of wild, messy, uncontrollable laughter, barefoot on the wet grass. That picture wasn't a symbol of rebellion. It was a symbol of rebirth. It was a daily reminder that true happiness isn't found in perfect presentations or flawless appearances. It's found in the real, imperfect, joyful moments. I had been told I didn't belong for so long that I had finally, completely believed it. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to stop begging for a place at their table and gave me the strength to build my own. And my home is a beautiful, happy place. It's a place where laughter is loud and love is real and everyone is welcome. Thank you for following my journey. If my story touched you or made you feel seen, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Most importantly, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to build your own table? Share your experience in the comments below. Let's remind each other that family is something you build, not just something you're born into. Thank you for watching,